dominant threat narrative is a calculated misdirection. Media fixates on kinetic weapons, missile salvos, drone swarms, source 3, and overt military posturing, source 4. This is legacy thinking. A symmetric high-cost conflict is a luxury only a solvent state can afford. The real threat vector is silent, economic, and mathematically certain. When a state faces a terminal solvency crisis, like Iran, offering citizens $5 a month to quell unrest, source 1, its strategic calculus is inverted. It cannot win a conventional fight. Its only rational move is asymmetric leverage. The primary target is not cities. It is the central nervous system of global finance and military command, the network of undersea fiber optic cables. Simultaneously, orbital assets are targeted, not with kinetic weapons, but with non-attributable methods: satellite blinding, GPS spoofing, signal jamming. The objective is not destruction. It is to induce informational paralysis. This creates the blind Leviathan, a superpower paralyzed by its own domestic fractures. Source 2, now rendered deaf and blind on a global scale. The blind Leviathan possesses immense force, but has lost its situational awareness. Its markets flatline. Its fleets cannot communicate. Its launch on warning protocols face the ultimate dilemma. Is the silence a technical failure or a decapitation strike? Analysts at CSIS confirm this is the new escalation ladder. The adversary does not need to launch a missile. They only need to cut a wire and wait for the protocol to do the work. This is the silent vector for systemic collapse. The public is told wars are about ideology or territory. This is a deliberate misdirection. At the highest levels, kinetic conflict is a function of a state's balance sheet. When internal liabilities, such as social unrest, economic stagnation, or an unpopular regime, exceed the state's capacity to manage them, a solvency crisis is triggered. The state must then externalize this crisis to prevent internal collapse. Consider Russia. Analysis from strategic institutions like CSIS reframes the conflict not as a simple land grab, but as a calculated response to a looming domestic liability. Faced with internal political fragility and an unpopular war, the Kremlin's move was a protocol to consolidate power. The kinetic event abroad becomes a tool to suppress dissent at home, a grim financial hedge against internal fragmentation. A state engineering a solvency war cannot afford a symmetric, conventional conflict. The kinetic cost is prohibitive. Its only rational move is to pivot to asymmetry. The objective shifts from battlefield victory to imposing unacceptable financial and political costs on the superior adversary. This is the domain of low-cost, high-leverage weapons systems, where drones are the premier asset, source 3. This blueprint is operational globally. In Iran, the regime's solvency is so precarious, it attempts to quell mounting social unrest with payments of $5 a month, source 1. A state this fragile cannot survive a conventional force-on-force engagement with a power like the US, source 4. Therefore, its only viable strategic doctrine is to develop capabilities that bypass conventional strength and directly attack an adversary's political and economic tolerance for pain. The conclusion is a mathematical certainty. Internal state weakness is the primary vector for asymmetric escalation. The solvency crisis is the trigger, forcing a pivot away from a fight the state cannot win, toward one it cannot afford to lose. This protocol doesn't just invite risk, it automates the path toward it. The strategic calculus has been inverted by a simple economic equation. Analysts at the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, have quantified this shift. On one side, a $5 million main battle tank, a marvel of industrial power. On the other, a $500 drone. The kinetic cost to destroy the asset is now 10,000 times less than the asset itself. This is not a balanced fight. It is an economic execution. This extreme cost-leverage ratio is the engine of what strategists call the democratization of violence. The ability to project lethal force is no longer a monopoly held by states with trillion-dollar budgets. It has been decentralized. For a nation-state facing a systemic solvency crisis, this isn't a new tactic. It's the only available protocol. Conventional force is a liability it cannot afford. Asymmetric leverage is its only path to survival. The objective is not to win, but to make the cost of attack so unacceptably high that the aggressor is forced onto a new escalation ladder. Every drone becomes a trigger, creating a direct vector to a launch-on-warning posture. The primary staging ground for the next systemic shock is not where legacy media directs your attention. It is the politically stable, resource-rich nations now classified by analysts at CSIs as permissive environments. Warnings regarding instability in regions like Southern Africa or even Canada are not the core threat. They are indicators of a proxy laboratory. These gray zones are where the next kinetic phase is being staged. A state facing a terminal solvency crisis, such as Iran offering citizens $5 a month to mitigate social unrest, Source 1, cannot afford a symmetric, conventional war. Simultaneously, a global power paralyzed by internal political fractures, Source 2, loses its surveillance capacity. This creates the perfect arbitrage for a cornered actor. The gray zone is the territory where the weakness of one state and the distraction of another create a new, undeclared battlefield. These zones are the ideal launchpad for the weapons that define this new era. As confirmed by Reuters, drone warfare is the future, 3. These are low-cost, high-leverage assets that can be shipped in parts and assembled anywhere. The purpose is not to defeat a military, but to inflict unacceptable economic and psychological costs. The port, the power grid, the pipeline, these are the targets. The gray zone provides the deniability and proximity required to execute. Conventional military threats, such as U.S. warnings of an attack on Venezuela, Source 4, are no longer a deterrent. They are an accelerant. For a failing state, the mathematical certainty of losing a symmetric fight forces the activation of asymmetric assets staged in these gray zones. This is not a choice, it is a protocol. According to RUSI, the activation of these proxy cells is now a launch-on-warning scenario, triggered by the threat of conventional force itself. The vector for systemic risk no longer travels over an ocean. It is staged from within. The launch-on-warning doctrine is not a strategy. It is a mathematical protocol inherited from the Cold War. The logic is a zero-sum calculation. If early warning systems detect an inbound nuclear salvo, you must launch your retaliatory strike before the incoming warheads arrive. Waiting for kinetic impact confirmation means your own arsenal is annihilated in its silos. The entire system is built to trade the risk of a false positive for the certainty of total destruction. It is a use-it-or-lose-it architecture. This protocol is predicated on a single, fragile assumption: the integrity of the data feed. The modern battlefield, however, is not defined by kinetic force, but by information denial. Analysts at RUSI identify this as the fog of digital war. A low-cost, non-attributable cyber attack targeting ground-based radar or satellite communication nodes can instantly blind the entire early warning network. No missiles are fired, no physical assets are destroyed, yet the system is decapitated. Inside the command bunker, the commander is now forced to make a decision with zero visibility. The screens are black. The protocol, however, is still running. It cannot differentiate between a technical malfunction and a successful decapitation strike already in progress. The absence of a signal becomes the signal. The doctrine was built to respond to a clear threat, not ambiguity. Waiting to regain sight could mean waiting until after impact. This is the ultimate expression of asymmetric leverage. A failing state, cornered by a solvency crisis and facing conventional military threats, does not need to build a rival nuclear arsenal. According to CSIS assessments, it only needs to weaponize uncertainty. By triggering the fog of digital war, it forces the superpower's own rigid, automated escalation protocol to turn against itself. The commander is no longer weighing options. They are executing a pre-written script based on fear. The internal weakness of one state has become the trigger for the entire system. The protocol for escalation is not discretionary. It is determined by mathematics. When a state actor faces an internal solvency crisis, its tolerance for external kinetic cost drops to zero. It cannot afford a symmetric war. Simultaneously, when the dominant global power is paralyzed by domestic fractures, as confirmed by open-source intelligence, its capacity for unified strategic response is compromised. This internal division is not a distraction. It is a systemic vulnerability. A cornered actor's only rational move is to reject the conventional battlefield. As noted by Reuters, drone warfare represents the future of low-cost, high-leverage conflict. USI reports confirm that non-state and state actors can now deploy swarm capabilities with plausible deniability. The objective is not military victory. It is to test the response protocol of a compromised adversary, to send a signal that imposes unacceptable economic cost without a clear return address. This is the calibration shot. It is designed to be attribution impossible. The calibration forecast. Within the next 12 months, expect a coordinated shutdown of crane operations and data processing at a major U.S. West Coast shipping port, likely Los Angeles or Long Beach. The event will be triggered by a localized EMP or targeted cyber-physical attack, blamed on faulty infrastructure or anonymous hacktivists. The disruption will last 48 to 72 hours, creating a multi-billion-dollar logistical backlog. It will not be an act of war. It will be a data point,